Hello, everyone, and welcome to this video on deploying Kestra on AWS. Let's jump right in. Here I am on AWS Console Home. If you're not familiar with AWS or don't have an account, you could just Google, make a free account, AWS sign up, and sign up for a free account. And I'm not really sure how it's decided, but typically when I make a new AWS account, I get an email within a day or two asking if I want $300 in free credits. And once you sign up for the first time, uh, there's a lot of free tier services you can use, experiment with. Some of those we will be using in this video, but even if you've had an account for a while and it's going to charge you just running through this walkthrough and then bringing down the resources after, will probably charge you less than $2 or $3 at most. Okay. And we are going to be following the Kestra documentation more or less. If we just Google Kestra AWS deployment, that's EKS. Let's see here. Click the first link. And I'm going to go to the docs, and over here, see if I can make this a little bigger. The installation guide that we will be following is going to be AWS EC2 with Amazon RDS and S3. Okay, so just at a glance, if we look here, we're going to create an EC2 instance and install Docker. Generate keys. If you're more of a learn by reading type of person, you can follow the documentations, use this video as a reference, and vice versa. I'm going to go ahead and start an EC2 instance, looking here with Ubuntu, 4 gigs of memory, and 2 virtual CPUs. So if we just click on EC2, or we could have searched up here, go to instances, and we can just launch instance, and I will call this Kestra for the name of our instance. And we're going to want Ubuntu. Looks like this is the latest at the moment. And if we scroll down, as the documentation said, we are going to want 4 gigs of memory, 2 virtual CPUs. So that is the T2 medium. Okay. And if you have a SSH key, you could just look for key pairs in the search up here, upload your public key and select that here. If you don't, that's okay. We're just going to create new key pair. RSA is fine. And I'm just going to call this Kestra key. And we'll see that downloaded there. And scrolling down, we're going to create a security group for this instance, allow SSH traffic from anywhere. If you want to be super secure, you could put your IP address, but chances are your IP address is determined by your internet service provider, and they can change that at any time. So just to be safe, I'm not really locking this down, I'm just going to say from anywhere. And we will be accessing this over HTTPS, and just check that box. Looking here, 8 gigs of storage is more than enough. So that looks good. And launch instance. That will take a few minutes. While that's running, I'm just going to open up a terminal here. And as we saw, our Kestra key.pem is in our downloads. I'm going to change to my SSH directory, and I'm just going to move. The little squiggly means my home directory. Let me make this much bigger. There we go. I'm going to go from my home directory, downloads, Kestra key.pem. Where do I want to move that? To my current directory. Okay, and now if we ls, we see that is there. And one other thing, or maybe 2 or 3 other things that will make our life much easier. We're going to make a config file just so we can get to this instance in Visual Studio Code. If you're just using SSH, you'll need to use Vim or Nano as a text editor to change the Docker Compose Kestra file. And it's just easier in Visual Studio Code, in my opinion. So we need to nano config to, if I can spell here, config to make our configuration file. And I just have this in a text document. So host with a capital H, you can name it whatever you want, just something friendly where it's easy to remember. The host name is going to be the IP address, and we will get that from our instance in a moment. And the user is going to be Ubuntu. And where is this key? Again, this tilde, I think it's called, is my home directory, .ssh, Kestra key.hem. And let me check if we have an IP for our instance yet. Still initializing, but we do have an IP. Let's see if I can Control C to copy that. And back here, Control Shift V, Control X to exit, Y to save the modified buffer, and just enter to keep the name the same. And we can try that out with SSH EC2, permission denied public key. Okay, let's do an ls-la8. Let's see if we modify our hem to 700, I believe it is. Let's up arrow twice. Actually, let me Control L to move that to the top. And we'll try that again. Okay, so that was the issue. A little gotcha there. Just remember, I feel like it happens sometimes and not others, but just 700 permission on your key and you should be good. All right, we can exit there. Now, we go back to the documentation and scroll down. We've set up our EC2 instance and we can SSH. And then we want to install Docker and Docker Compose. And they have the instructions here. And if you scroll down, it tells you all the commands you need to run. I honestly just like to put those into a file, make it executable, and then run it. It's just much easier. So actually, I'll just do that here. We'll go back to our instance. And here, we line that up a little nicer to look at maybe. And we're going to make a file. It's like a little delay there. And I'll just call this install Docker, like that. And again, I have the instructions just copied here. The one command that isn't in the Docker documentation is, I believe it's called the shebang, the !! telling this what program to run these commands with. In my case, I want to use bash, so that's there. And if we look, just update, get the certificates, all that good stuff. And if we switch back to the Docker documentation, you can see that's just all these commands. And there should be a post install. Yes, there. And then it used to be you had to add the Docker group. I don't believe you need to anymore. I think the install takes care of that. So I don't have that in mind, but then add the user to the Docker group. And new GRP Docker is the same as just logging out, logging back in. So there's permissions apply to your user. You're in the Docker group and you can run Docker. Okay, all that out of the way. Back here in Nano, Control X, Y to save the modified buffer, enter to keep the name. And then we just need to make it executable with chmod +X, install Docker. You can tab to autocomplete and / install Docker. And that does take a few minutes to download all those packages and install them. So we'll pick back up after that is done installing. Okay, that was actually really quick, only took a minute or two. And we can test to make sure we have Docker and it's working correctly by just typing, let me make this a little cleaner, Docker run hello-world. And it's pulling it. It ran it. Hello from Docker. We now have our EC2 instance with Docker and Docker Compose installed. We can go ahead and exit the terminal and we'll switch to Visual Studio Code, which is just a little bit easier to work with in my opinion. So I already have that installed on my system, so I'll just open that here. If you don't have the SSH extension installed, you just need to click over here, Extensions, SSH. It's usually the top one, Remote SSH from Microsoft. Install that. And then down here, see if I can make this a little bit bigger. We can click Open Remote Window, connect in the current window, and it reads our config file and looks for the different keys we have, or the hosts that we have listed, I should say. I only have one EC2, so I'll click, let that set up. Okay. And then open folder. There's nothing on this EC2 instance, so just go into the home directory. Trust the authors of all files in the parent folder home. Yes, that's fine. Close that. I'm going to make a directory just to make it a little cleaner. So I'm going to hit Control, the tick mark, the key usually underneath your escape key. And then I have a terminal here. And you can see we are on our virtual machine. Okay. Now, the next step, let's look at the documentation. Download and run Kestra. So we just need to copy that command. And hit enter. And now we have actually ls to list the files. Oh, I did not cd into the Kestra directory, but that's okay. I'm just going to move the Docker Compose from the current directory to Kestra. Oh, I don't think I made that directory. Make directory Kestra. All right, there we are. And now we can go ahead and open that in the window. And we can see the Docker Compose file here. If you're familiar with Docker, you can read through this, get a feel of what's going on. If you're not, you can just wave your hand at this and remove the parts that I do, and that's fine as well. So we have some volumes, so places to store data. We've got Postgres for the metadata, Kestra data for storage. And you can see this is just pulling the images, doing some health checks, configuring the connection to the database, and then forwarding the ports from the Docker network to the local machine. Okay, so let's switch back to the documentation here and set the basic authentication to true, which means rather than when we pull up Kestra and just going right into the GUI, we will be prompted for a username and password in order to access it. And we do need a valid email address. Scroll down a little bit, or actually up, and we are looking for the basic auth. I hope that's big enough. I'm going to make it a little bigger and trying to keep it still usable for me. Basic auth is true. And I'm just going to use an email address. I happen to have a noob forever data course at gmail.com. For the password, I'm just going to put Kestra PW. If you're going to keep this up and running for a while, I would suggest a much stronger password. But for this walkthrough, I'm going to be taking down everything after this, so that's fine. Okay. Back to the documentation. It says to start Kestra, but I'm going to skip that step and wait to the end, just because I'm pretty positive everything's going to work. Going down to allow external traffic. So it exposes 8080 as the port. So what we need to do is, let's see here, we are going to need to allow that to come in. So we will need to look at the security groups. Let me switch back there and look for security groups. EC2. If it lets me click on it, let me just go to, oh, there we go. Okay, so we have our default security group, and then the launch wizard was created when we launched our EC2 instance. If you had a bunch of EC2 instances already running or have spun them up in the past, you might have a bunch of launch wizard security groups here. Just go to the latest one, click into that. You're going to want to edit the inbound rules, keep those. We're going to add a custom TCP, and that's going to be on 8080. And again, just in case our IP changes, we're going to allow it traffic from anywhere. And we'll just save that rule. Okay, good to go there. Switching back. If we scroll down, use AWS RDS Postgres as a database backend. Let's see. So we will go to the console. I'm just going to click that to open it. Nice and easy. Create a database. Choose Postgres. It says you can also use MySQL. I'm going to stick with Postgres as it's recommended. I'll set a username and password. And we are going to connect it to our EC2 compute resource. Okay, I might need to glance back at this, but let's get that going. So I'm going to do DB instances, create a database, and let's see, standard create. Not sure the difference between those two. I'm just going to call this Kestra DB. I'm going to use the free tier. It's not going to be, I'm the only one that's going to be using it, so it doesn't really need too much power. Let's see. Self-manage to create our own password, and I'll leave the username as Postgres. And I'm going to make this super secure and use Kestra PW again. Actually, let me count out. KESTRAPW. Okay, it is 8 characters. If you notice, it needs to be at least 8 characters. So if you just tried putting in PW, got down to the end, and it said you can't create it, make the password 8 characters. All right. We can connect to our EC2 compute resource. There we go. All right. I'm going to choose an existing DB subnet. So that's fine. VPC. I'm not sure if we need to select that or not. Let's scroll down here. Okay, we did the existing and we did the launch wizard. Beautiful. So that all looks good. Don't need performance insights. I don't believe that costs anything. And that all looks good. We'll go ahead and create the database and let that spin up. So while that's going, we'll switch back here. And we do not need our Postgres data volume here. Going down, we don't need the Postgres service at all. And I think that takes care of everything except maybe, depends on Postgres. So that looks good. And actually, I think I may have. Yes, forgot to get the health check. So let's go ahead and we'll get rid of those. Okay, and we'll update that in a moment. The data source is Postgres, but again, get rid of the depends on. I'm just going to Control S. You see this white dot up here? That means it's not saved. I've had Visual Studio crash on me a number of times and lost quite a bit of work. So Control S. You see that X up there? Means your work is saved. Okay. Close that. So still creating the instance while that's going. We can move on. Or actually, we'll circle back to the create Kestra database because I feel like the database takes a few minutes to come up. It's not too bad, but it would be a wait. We can update the username and password. And actually, let me switch back here. So the username we had was Postgres. And we used the password Kestra PW. And we're just going to need to replace this part with our connections string, which we'll get from the database in just a moment. And we'll see how that's doing. So creating, while that's going, we can go ahead and set up the S3 and then we can bring it all up at once. Okay. So to set up the S3 storage, we want to go to the S3 console, create a bucket, and create a new user with AWS S3 full access. Okay. So up here, I'm just going to search for S3. Click on that. We'll go to S3 here. And if you have buckets already, you might get a different screen. At the moment, I don't have any in this AWS account. So I'll just click create bucket, general purpose in the same region. And I'll just call this Kestra data. I'll be aware that this name cannot be reused as long as I'm using it. It does need to be globally unique. So whatever name you choose, if someone in Japan or Kazakhstan or France or South Africa has already used that name for one of their S3 buckets, it will not let you use it. Okay. And everything else is default. We don't need versioning, tags, and we'll create the bucket. While that's going, we will go to IAM and create our user with permissions to write data to this bucket. And once we're on the IAM screen, we'll go to users and we'll create a user. And I'll just call this Kestra storage user. And go next, add user to groups. I'm going to create a group, and I'm just going to call this bucket users. And down here, if we search for S3, we want Amazon S3 full access, which means they have full access, well, to S3 buckets. They can create them, delete them, the objects inside as well. In production, you would want to limit these permissions to probably just reading and writing, because you don't need to create or destroy the bucket itself, but that's good enough for our purposes. So that looks good. Check the box to add the user to the group and create user. All right, let's see how our database is doing. All right, it's available. If we click on that, the endpoint is what we want here. And I'm just going to copy that. And if we look back at the documentation, that will walk you through, let's see, for new users, we will need to create an access key. I guess we should finish that part up first. Let me go ahead and paste this in here real quick. And again, Control S to save. And if we click on our user, create access key, we want an application running on an AWS compute service. Giving us a little warning there. Don't need to do the tag. And we are just going to copy the access key. Actually, there is one thing we need to add and a few things we need to remove first. So here, if we control home, we don't need the storage volume anymore. So no volumes at all. We can remove this from the volumes. And scrolling down to where that's defined, rather than local, what we want is S3. So we can just click here, copy the whole thing. Let's switch back. And if you highlight and shift and do the square bracket, the one to the right, if you're looking at your keyboard, that will indent the block, or sorry, control square bracket to the right. That will move your indentation. And you just need to line that up. We are already under Kestra, so let me take that out. And we just need to line that up with the other pieces here, the server, the queue. All right. Okay, so now we just need our access key, secret key, region, and bucket. If we switch back here, let me show that's the access key. I can just click copy. And if we switch back, let me center that a little bit. We will keep the quotes there, just be aware. And we'll paste that in for the secret key. Copy that as well. And region. Let's see here. Oops. Let me go back to S3 to get that, because that was our user that can access the bucket and not the bucket itself. And it's actually just this last part here. In my case, US East 1. So I'll copy that. And I have a very bad memory, so let's see. I think I called that Kestra storage. Better double check. Kestra data. Darn. Okay, Kestra data. Control S. Make sure I save that. And let me zoom out a little bit here. Hopefully that's still big enough, but we have Postgres gone, and we have our connection string, username and password. All looks good. So moment of truth, control tick mark. Again, that little tick under your escape key. If you're doing this all in terminal, you can just go ahead and type the command docker compose up. If you don't want to see the output, you can do -D. I usually don't do that, especially the first time, because if there are any errors, they will be printed to the terminal, and I want to see those. Oh, and make sure you're in the directory where your Docker Compose file is, in my case, Kestra, and we'll let that pull. Okay, I did get an error. I can be a little bit cryptic here, but I've actually done this mistake before. So if we look carefully here, we should be able to see database Kestra does not exist. I skipped that step. I think I said we were going to circle back to it, and I just did not. And that's probably easiest way to do it is in the terminal. SSH, the shorthand name from our config file. All right. So we just need to download the Postgres client, I believe it is, and create that database. So that was way back here. Oh, that was after the create database. Scrolling too fast. So we just need to install the client. Yes, that's fine. And create DB. Now we will need the endpoint there. So we'll grab that again. And switch back to RDS. Grab that. Paste it in here. There we go. And the username we used was Postgres. Actually, I can move this piece down. -U Postgres port, which is 5432 -P 5432. And the database we want to connect is Kestra. It's asking for our password, which we set in RDS. In my case, Kestra PW. And the terminal got a little hinky there, but I'm pretty sure it worked. We can test it out by just trying to bring up the Docker container again and see if we get an error. Should be much quicker this time because the images have already been pulled. So we'll give that a moment. Looks good so far. And while that's going on, we just need to grab the IP address of our instance. Could also look in the config file. And I hate that they don't have a copy option on the IP, but I just Control C. And that's going to be the port that we allowed in, which is 8080. All right. And again, with my bad memory, I need to remember the username and password. So I'll just copy that and Kestra PW for the password. Beautiful. Make that a little bigger. And we will go ahead and switch to dark mode. I think it just looks a little nicer. Has my right time zone. That all looks good. We can go to flows and we can create a flow. We can also go to the editor I'm going to skip the tour. See if I make that just a little bit bigger. And I'm actually going to import a really simple flow I exported on a different day. And I'm going to click into it and go to the editor. Let's see, I am just going to copy this here. Go to flows. I'm going to create a new flow, paste it in there, and then call it demo and save it. And I am going to delete the one I imported. Doesn't really matter, but I don't know. It's just easier, in my opinion, that way. Okay, pretty simple flow here. There's only 2 tasks. I'm actually going to comment out this last one here. It's just going to grab this global power plant database. I guess if I zoom in, it messes up that line a little bit. And it just goes ahead and downloads it. Where's it going to download it to? It's going to download it to storage, which we have set to S3. So if we switch back over here and go to S3, we have our bucket. And if we look in here, we just created it. There's nothing in there. So let's go ahead and run our flow and see what happens. And if we just execute, I'm going to Control S to save. I'm really horrible at that. And now it doesn't warn us. We have green. So if we look, it downloaded the file. In Kestra, these downloads and any data you're pulling down is ephemeral. Would make this video much longer if I went into it. There's other videos out there about how to pass those files along to other tasks, how to send them to another S3 bucket, save it, load it into a database. But just remember, it's an orchestrator, so the data isn't meant to stay on this storage. So it will store it in temporary directories. And if we switch back to our bucket and just do a refresh, we see that now. So if we go in, we see we have our namespace. That's going to be our flow, and that's going to be the execution. And if we go into tasks, the task of download file, and then we have our data there. If you're running Kestra just in Docker by itself, it will automatically clean these up. If you're running it with this configuration, you do need to add an extra step, which you probably saw. So let me go ahead and go up many directories here. And I'm just going to delete that. And it's warning me that there are objects beneath this directory level. So I need to just put permanently delete, saying, yes, I am sure any objects below this directory I want deleted as well. Okay. So if we go back here, we still have our bucket, but now it's empty. And switching back, I'm going to go to my flows again, the download file flow. Open that in editor. And then there's another task in this flow. If I can uncomment that, there we go. And I just use control whack, the key with the question mark and the slash, to comment and uncomment. And this is just going to make sure all those files are removed. Control S, successfully saved. And I'm going to execute that again. And it's downloading the file. This is the flow. There are 2 tasks, one being download file, the other being clean files. And if we click in there, success, and we go back to S3, and we see we have the whack, demo, download file, executions, but that data from that execution is not there. That data is still preserved in the database, so we can go back and look. We go back to our dashboard, we can see that those all succeeded. Okay, that's pretty much it for this walkthrough, but I will walk through the cleanup, which can be a little extensive in AWS. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the docs and just leave it here with, if you like Kestra and you like what they're doing, you can show your appreciation by starting the GitHub. I'm not logged in at the moment, but if you are, you can start the repo. It's like giving the developers a little round of applause. Know that you're happy with their work. If you have any questions or get stuck, need help, you can hit this button to join the Slack. A lot of knowledgeable people ready to help. If you go pretty much anywhere on the Kestra website, you'll see these two things, which, again, the Slack is the best place to go to get help. All right, so cleanup, here we go. Switching back here, I'm going to close Kestra because, well, we're in the cleanup phase, and I'm going to go to RDS, go to my instances, and action. If you are just pausing your instance, you don't want to get charged, you don't want this to keep running, you can say stop temporarily. But no, it will automatically restart in 7 days. That's just one of the quirks of it, but just be aware you can stop temporarily. But if you're taking a few weeks off, just remember every 6 days, log in and say temporarily stop again. In my case, I'm done with this one, so I am going to delete. I don't need a final snapshot. I don't need to keep my automatic copies. And I'm going to say delete. And even though it doesn't matter, I'm going to come back here to my terminal, Control C, and stop Kestra. And let's see, we strongly recommend, delete me. Not sure why that's not working. I may need to stop it first, but okay, you know what? I am going to go ahead and stop temporarily and let that just wind down. And while that's going, I'm going to go to EC2, and I'm going to go ahead and terminate the instance. Terminate it like that. All right, that's shutting down. Let's see, what else? S3. I'm going to delete that bucket. And it's going to have me empty the bucket of all objects first, so there's nothing in there, and permanently delete. We also did create a user, which is very bad to leave out there dangling in case somebody gets a hold of your keys. And we're going to delete that user. Kestra storage user. All right. We also created a security group. Or actually, a user group, I'm sorry, but yeah, let's go ahead and do that one. User groups. We don't need that group anymore. Bucket users, delete, and security groups, which are tricky here. So stick with me. Okay. Launch wizard. We should be able to delete this one as long as our EC2 instance came down okay. Default, I do want to keep. All right, that seems just like a shadow. So EC2 RDS, which I always get them backwards, but okay. So this allowed outbound traffic on 5432. The other one allows inbound traffic. So that allows the communication between Postgres and Kestra or whatever application you're using. But just know you need to come in here. It will not let you delete it unless you delete the rules first. I'll edit the outbound rules, delete. So now it doesn't have any. And now that we don't have any rules, we should be able to delete the security group. Try RDS is still winding down. So let me go back to security groups. I think we did EC2 RDS. Now we'll do RDS EC2. Notice no outbound rules, but we do have an inbound rule. And we will edit the inbound rules. Delete that. That stopped. Going to delete. Maybe I just didn't see that box last time, or it wasn't there because it was running. But now that's deleting. That does take a bit of time. Let's switch back and see if it knows it's deleting, so it should let us delete those security groups. All right. We'll give that another minute. I don't mind hanging out with y'all. Okay, few minutes. It just disappeared. Didn't even have to hit refresh, which is always nice. Now let's try that one more time. Security groups. And I'm going to see if I can zap them both at the same time here. All right. Just be aware, I've had it happen, I believe, where everything went away and it was still giving me a warning on this. If you are getting that, make sure you delete the rules as we just did. Go into the security groups, delete all the rules. If you still can't delete it, you're probably good to go. Do whatever. Come back to it the next day. Might take some time for it to sink in on Amazon's side, and then delete and give that a refresh. And now we are back to just having our default security group. Again, things we were checking for cleanup, EC2, not running instances, but instances in general. Not sure why I still have one. Oh, that's just going to take a little bit to go away, but it is terminated. RDS. No instances there. S3. Pretty sure I deleted that. Okay, maybe I missed a checkbox. That's why we double check just to make sure. Let's see. IAM users. And here, no users, no groups. One last thing, if you really wanted to, SSH keys, I always forget what it's called. Maybe key manager, key pairs. And if we look here, you can delete that, especially if you have other things running in your AWS account. Oh, delete, that's probably case sensitive. I just like to make sure there's a thorough cleanup. Okay, so I think that takes care of it all. Uh, if you're going to put this project down for any amount of time, you could copy that Docker Compose file and use it as a template if you're recreating it. Of course, you'll need to update uh, the S3 access key, location, name of the bucket, the connection string to your database, and the password. If you set it differently, you'll need to recreate the Kestra database inside the RDS, but just a good way to get you up and going again if you're just going to take a break. But again, that's it for this video. I would highly encourage you to start the Kestra repo. I'll let them know you appreciate their work. Join the Slack if you have any questions or comments, anything like that. And hopefully you enjoyed this video.